Hello there and welcome to what is now part 3 of a little mini series of videos that I've put together about how I play and approach playing American Civil War epic battles using the black powder rules. So I'll put some links to the to part 1 and part 2 in the description below. But in this particular video I'm focusing again on the supplement and that you get from Warlord Games. And so today's video I'm looking at the passage of lines, firefights and the whipped rule. Okay, so I hope you're enjoying these. Please do continue to leave comments for me, it's really helpful. And I'll be back soon for part 4. Thank you. Okay, the passage of lines. So in the main black powder rulebook, basically friendly units, so we've got some Confederates here, we've got a brigade of Confederates, got some Union here. So if this commander wanted to move these units through this unit here to take up positions here, can do so with no penalty. As long as you get your order off to move, there's no penalty for moving through into that in the main rulebook. The only stipulation is if that move ends on top of that unit, you can't do it, but otherwise you can move through. So in the American Civil War supplement, we got this passage of lines. Now, the detail in the Epic supplement doesn't give you the background as much as Glory Hallelujah does, which talks about how difficult that was for the period, and basically trying to reflect the fact that this unit here, this Confederate unit's been on the line for a while, for an hour or so, in a bit of a firefight with these Union regiments. As you can see, it's taken a few casualties, it's now shaken. So he wants to bring up some fresh units, some fresh reserves into the line to take over the firefight. And basically the supplement talks about how difficult that was at the time, that basically units would become intermingled, confusion of battle, trying to order the troops through, seeing their mates on the floor, dead and dying, except for the wounded. So it's a very difficult thing to actually bring regiments through from reserves. So this rule tries to reflect and give you that flavour for that issue. It's quite straightforward. First thing to talk about is the range for it. Now, as you know, I halve my ranges. If you watch my other videos, I halve everything. It talks about 24 inches in the book, but I've reduced that to 12, and you can see that works pretty well in this scenario. 12 inches is basically, this unit here is within 12 inches of an enemy unit, therefore it wants to move through, it would need to take a passage of lines check. It's 24 in the book, which as you can see would be all the way back here, which is way too long for me, so that works pretty well. The other thing to talk about is 12-inch range, and they've got 2 regiments here who want to come through. So it talks about the fact that to take a passage of lines check, it needs to be half or more of a regiment's moving through. So as you can see in this one, half or more of this regiment's trying to move through this regiment, therefore they would require a passage of lines check. Whereas this regiment here, as you can see, less than half is moving through, so they wouldn't. So even though they're within 12 inches of that unit there, they wouldn't need to take that check because there's less than half moving through. The test itself is quite straightforward. You basically roll against the morale. So in this case, this unit's got a morale of 4. So on a roll of a d6, you would need a 4 or more, so 4, 5 or 6. You roll that dice, if it's a 4, 5 or 6, they can move through. If you roll 1, 2, 3, they move up and they stop just in front. So basically, you would finish them here, basically. So if they failed it, you would just move them up to this point here, and they'd be touching the unit there, like that. Okay. It just means they don't go. So say if you've got a good roll and you wanted to move further up, you'd be stuck there. In the Glory Hallelujah book, it does actually have a different result where you can actually stop in front as well. But in the Epic version, you just basically move through and you end up in front of that unit there. There's a couple of modifiers. So if they've got no wounds on them, if they've got no casualties, you get a +1. So that 4 becomes, if their morale was 4, you'd be rolling on a 3, 4, 5 or 6. And if you've got a commander attached, it's another +1. So that would be 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. Don't often have that, so so if it's +1 for no casualties, another +1 for commander. Okay, so that's passage of lines. Pretty straightforward, nice little rule. So yeah, that's passage of lines. Okay, just a quick talk on firefights. Basically, in the main black powder rulebook, you can make as many moves as you like, so 2 or 3 moves, and still shoot. In American Civil War, you can only make 1 move. So if you move more than once, you can't shoot. I mentioned this in the cavalry video because you've got your free dismount for the dismounted cavalry, which they can still shoot. But in this scenario, I've got the same brigade I had before. It's got the 2 units, so the general here wants to move them through. So we assume this one makes its passage of lines check, so we can move through. So 1 move, up to say here, 6 inches. So they would still be able to fire then that turn. But because these are back here, if he wants to move them all the way up to here,
that's going to be more than two, that's basically two moves, they would not be able to shoot. So you'd have to only move them once up to say here, and then they could still shoot. So it just shows you where you're positioning your troops is quite important, because if I move them up to there, then great, they're in a better position maybe. Particularly they're protecting this unit now because they wouldn't be a clear target for shooting, but they now can't shoot, and therefore they're not a duty target for them there. So again, just a little thing to remember, anything over one move you can't shoot. So you can just think about where you're positioning your units for any firefights. Okay, so let's talk about the whipped rule. So I think if you're new to the game, or perhaps you haven't got as much time for a game, or even if you've got limited space or a busy battlefield, you could potentially not use this. I mean, I use the whipped rule, but it is the most complex one in the rulebook, I would say, in the supplement. There's lots of subsections to it. I can't remember them all. I always have to refer to that when I'm playing. But it does add that bit of flavour, and again reflects the warfare of the period. But like I say, I don't think it would ruin your experience if you didn't use it, and one you want to add a bit later maybe. But effectively, it's designed to reflect the fact that firefights were less decisive in the American Civil War, and that regiments would often kind of, once they basically been shot up a bit or a bit battered by firefights, they would retire quickly. Because in the main Black Powder rulebook, if a unit breaks, it is destroyed. That's both in hand-to-hand combat and in shooting. So for example, this unit here, it's already shaken, as you can see, and it's got 3 casualties because it's shaken. Say the unit have another good round of fire and it takes a few more casualties and fails its break test. In the normal Black Powder rules, it would be destroyed, but in American Civil War, it becomes whipped. So it's not for hand-to-hand combat, that would still be destroyed, but just for shooting, just for firefights. So how does it work? So in that scenario, it's failed its break test. The first thing you need to do, it needs to retire away. It does say in the rulebook, you make one full move to your rear without changing formation. If you can't make that one move because something's in the way, you can make a second. If you can't make that second move, you are destroyed. But in this scenario here, as you can see, that unit can clearly, so infantry move 6, and by half all my ranges, so that could move back 6 inches, so it would move back off the line to here. Let's bring the tokens over as well. But then there's a series of sub-rules that determine what this unit can or can't do. But the key thing is it's still part of your game, so you've still got a unit that's active in your game. Whereas if it was in, say, Napoleonics, that unit would have been destroyed and removed from the table. So it is interesting. It does, and you got to think you've still got a unit there that can fight and shoot, but it's very limited. So the first thing to understand is it can't advance. So for example, this commander here could not then, in his turn, order this unit to advance towards the enemy. So it could order these 2 units to advance, but not this unit. And that I find is one of the issues for whip rules when I've used it, or when I use it, is sometimes it gets more and more disconnected from the game, particularly if you're being successful and your army's moving up the table. You can't advance towards the enemy. So so it just means you're a little bit stuck and limited what you can do. But what you could do, so for example, if this was a defensive position, it could be still holding the line here, maybe there's an objective here or something, and it's whipped, it could still be here doing something. But if you're advancing up the table, it does become a little bit limited what it can offer. Which is why I say, if you didn't use it, it's not the end of the world. Second thing is it must retire from enemy within 12 inches. So for example, I halve my ranges, so it would be 6. So for example, if this unit had moved right up to here, I'll move this unit out of the way for now. Say for example, that unit regiment had moved up to here and is now within 6 inches of that unit. They would have to retire away from that unit again, one full move. Now, it's a bit ambiguous in the rules about whether you do that straight away, but I always do it on their turn. So, for example, if these moved up in their turn, then when it comes to this turn, they would have to retire one move. That's how I play it. By the way, that doesn't, I think it's unless they're occupying, so if these are occupying a defensible position, so for example, the wall there, they're occupying a defensive position, you don't have to then retire. It's only if they're in the open ground. If it's artillery, so if this was an artillery unit, you can use 2 moves, so one to limber and one to move. So that's a slight addendum for artillery. The unit can't charge or initiate hand-to-hand combat. So again, in this scenario here, it couldn't charge or into that unit there. Obviously, the unit could charge these; they could still fight, but you can't initiate that combat. Once you're shaken or you're disordered, you can't rally. So this commander couldn't join that unit and try and rally off a casualty to remove the shaken. it remains shaken for the rest of the game, or if it was disordered, it remains disordered. So again, it's got those minus penalties for shooting in hand-to-hand. It's considered lost for the purpose of brigade morale. So let's move this back a little bit. So in this scenario here, you've got the 3 units in this brigade. So this brigade would be broken once 2 units were broken. So say, for example, this unit was destroyed in hand-to-hand combat, and that unit would then be, this brigade would be broken because that's been destroyed, and these are whipped. Or if this became whipped itself, then you've got 2 units that were broken effectively. So they're still on the table, but they still count towards the brigade morale. If they leave the table, they can't come back, fair enough. They also get a permanent -1 command penalty. So again, if this commander wanted to order them to do something, so move or change formation, whatever, it's -1. And also they have their stamina reduced by 1, but not to 0. And also their shooting and hand-to-hand dice are reduced by 1, but never to 0. What I tend to do, I've got a couple of things. So I've actually had these whipped tokens made up because I can't remember all these rules and which ones are whipped. So I actually put the little whipped token on there as well. And because you have your stamina reduced by 1, I remove 1 stand, and that really helps me to remember that basically they're now only a stamina of 2, because they were 3 previously, being a standard regiment. They're now 2, so it just helps me remember that. And also for shooting, they get 1 less shooting dice. Well, that's easy to remember because they normally have 3. They're now down to 2, so you can just remember that as well. And for hand-to-hand, they go from 6 to 5. So yeah, so it does nerf them quite a lot, but effectively you still have got a unit on the table, and they can still do something. To be fair, I've had a whipped unit shoot at another unit before, and it's made them whipped as well. So you know, they're still effective. I've actually had a whipped unit that's been successful in hand-to-hand combat as well. So they're not the worst thing to have, but as I say, it does mean you've got to remember that they are whipped. You need to remember those rules, and you just need a little bit of admin around the game to control that as well. Okay, so that was the whipped rule.